So hi, I'm Jonathan Romley. I've been a founder of companies in the United States, an investor and board member in Ukraine and in Poland. Currently, I am the CEO of a company called Clear Research in San Francisco, where we're using artificial intelligence and deep learning to create a new generation of visual recognition systems. But I'm actually not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about a company that I helped finish, but not a company that I started. And that company is Viewdle. So Viewdle is interesting. Viewdle is a company that was founded in Ukraine by Ukrainians in 2007. The company was a team of local entrepreneurs and actually a team from the university as well. So there was a research lab in the university, the National Technical University of Ukraine, KPI, in Kyiv, that had been working on face recognition technology. And some local Ukrainian entrepreneurs that identified the technology that the university was working on. And they actually did the first deal in the history of Ukraine, in its young history, of course, but anyway, in its young history, to license technology out of the university and create a company from a lab that had been in the university. So the first funding for the company actually came from Ukrainians. So there were Ukrainian angels that funded the company initially, although they were Ukrainians that were based in the United States. So ultimately, the company went on to raise about $18 million in venture capital in the US, and sold for $45 million to Google in October of 2012. So this is still to this day, 2 years later, the largest exit of a venture-backed company in the history of Ukraine. So why did this work? And of course, work is subjective, but anyway, it sold for more than was invested, so let's say that it worked. So why did it work? Core technology and a universal concept. So if someone asked, what is this company that you're working on? And we would say, very simply, it's a face recognition company. And I think everybody can understand what that is supposed to mean. So it's a really simple concept. And working on this kind of technology doesn't require any sort of regional experience. Of course, it requires it's a math and technology experience. But it really, the people that work on this kind of company and this kind of technology, it didn't really matter where they were in the world, so long as they had the experience and they could solve the problem well. So over the time of the development of the company established a global business profile. So that means that although the company had started in Ukraine, eventually they did move their headquarters to Silicon Valley. Now, I mean, what does that mean? That means there were 6 of us in Palo Alto and 80 people in Ukraine, and about a dozen people doing mobile development in Montevideo in Uruguay in South America. So there was an active M&A market for companies like this. So what I mean by that is there were half a dozen companies that were acquired that were doing face recognition before Viewdle was acquired. So that really helped to set a market price for the company. It also helped that most of them were acquired by Google, one by Facebook. So really there was an active demand for this profile of technology and of team. The investors that invested in Viewdle, the US VCs, they were really dedicated. They were not going to let the deal die under any circumstances, and they were going to use every single last resource that they had to make sure that the deal went across the finish line. With that in mind, we were, as later stage managers in the business, as an executive team, we were highly motivated to focus on liquidity. Okay, so how can you do it? So this is one way, and the model that I'm going to share today is a model that works in an emerging market. It works in a market without a big history of venture-backed exits. So in the context of this conversation, I'm not going to talk about trying to build a company that you sell for $5 billion. So no unicorns. That's not that you can't build them, but I'm not going to talk about them. What I'm going to talk about is a model that's focused on creating incremental data points for exits in a market that doesn't have a long-established history of venture-backed exits. So when you're thinking about investing in a company, or if you're a company in another country thinking about buying a company in another country, it helps whether you're investing or buying something if there's a market price or a history that's been set to give you some idea of what you might be able to exit for or what you should pay for a company. So what these ecosystems, just as a generalization, what ecosystems tend to lack in emerging markets is a history of data points that can be used to really elevate the ecosystem. So if the objective then becomes to start, fund, sell, and repeat it, to build these incremental data points. So the strategy for that. So the first thing to do is pick a universal problem. That means it's something that has really nothing to do with your local market and is something that everybody can understand without a lot of explanation. So I think that when we think of like what's a universal problem, so things like discovery, communication, safety and security, infrastructure, some other things, and hardcore tech, right? So Viewdle would fall kind of under that hardcore tech category. So when you look at something like safety and security, for example, I'll give you an example of that. You look at a market like Russia. So if you take antivirus, so antivirus is a really simple example where everybody has this problem for the most part. I have a Mac, I have it less so, but it still exists. And everyone can understand that it's a problem that needs to be solved. And it doesn't matter whether you're in Moscow or whether you're in Palo Alto or if you're in Istanbul or anywhere else, you can understand that, okay, so this is a problem that needs to be fixed. And if we can fix this problem, there's probably a good way that we can monetize it, that we can build a company around it. So in this model that I'm sharing today, it doesn't work for consumer internet, doesn't work for business software, doesn't work for e-commerce, which is interesting because e-commerce in an emerging market tends to be one of the first data points for exits, right? And as I understand it, I believe that the largest exit so far in Turkey was an e-commerce company for $250 million or something like this, right? So, these are the data points that do tend to establish a little bit earlier. But for the model that I'm going to share today, consumer internet, business software, e-commerce, they don't fit. Also, first world problems don't fit. So I'll give you one example. I had a company that came to me once and said, I am going to solve the problem of small business procurement in the United States. Now, this company was not in the United States. And I said, okay, cool. So tell me about your experience with the pain of procurement in small businesses in the United States. And they said, well, actually, we've never been to the United States, but we read on the internet that there's a big problem with procurement there. So something like that doesn't really work. I think another first world problem tend to be things that if you're not in that problem, you don't understand. So something like Snapchat only comes out of a city like Los Angeles. The problem of how can I send a photo, maybe a nice racy photo to my girlfriend that disappears after 5 seconds. This is not a problem that emerging markets are well suited to solve. So at least in the context of this, let's avoid them. Work with experienced investors. This can be a challenge depending on sort of the level of development of any particular ecosystem. I think that this is somewhat less important with early stage investors. So, your friends, family, even early stage seed rounds, you kind of have to take the money where you can get it. Of course, you always want to take money that has some value add, but one thing to be considerate of is down the line, you may take some local money and you may actually go out to raise from a US investor that may say, well, I'm not really sure where that person's money came from. Of course, this is particularly a problem in a market like Ukraine. Not really sure where that person's money came from, so I'm not sure how comfortable I feel investing. So I think that, be aware of who you're taking money from, but in any case, you've got to get that first round done. When it comes to working with the next stage of investors, it's critical that you work with investors that have sold a company like yours before. If you haven't had an exit as a founder, and your investors haven't had an exit in your space, this really doesn't create a recipe for success. This creates a recipe for, maybe everybody has the best intentions, but everybody is kind of figuring things out as they go along. So when you have this problem, you should get help. And I think that this tends to be the profile of when you hear go get some executive help of what people think of. I think this probably, in most cases with startups, is not really what you need. You tend to need something a little bit more like this. Non-founder executives that have had the experience of taking a similar deal across the finish line, doesn't matter where it is in the world. Ultimately, the M&A process pretty much works out the same way. But somebody that's had this experience, that's worked with a similar company and is taking the deal across the finish line. I think this is critical when you're in a market that doesn't have a long history of success, where everybody's kind of figuring out things as they go along. So much of this function is largely commoditized in other parts of the world. So if you can leverage and do the things that you do well here, but actually the things that you don't do well, outsource to somewhere else. And so establish a global footprint. One thing that Viewdle did was actually outsource in some ways. You could say that Viewdle outsourced its executive management to the United States, to Silicon Valley. But the technology was good, the team was good, we can build something good, we've got a great solution, but you know what, there's some things that we don't do so well, so we're gonna get some help. And when it comes to establishing a global footprint, that doesn't necessarily mean Silicon Valley, right? But go to the places where it makes sense, where there might be something that you at home, not necessarily just in your business, but maybe in your country, you don't do well. I don't know what it is, but it could be anything. There are other places in the world where people do that better. It could be product management, it could be marketing, it could be business development, or it could be the commoditized function of executive management. In any case, balancing out your company and presenting a global footprint, a global image, you're no longer just a business from Turkey, you're no longer just a business from Ukraine, you're no longer just a business from Poland, you're a business, a company with a global profile, with global visibility, even if it is just 10 people somewhere. How you present yourself, of course, it all comes out in diligence, right? So it's not like you're fooling someone that's gonna buy your company, but in the process, you are raising and creating this global visibility for your company and really getting in front of people. Because, at the end of the day, companies are not bought. Companies are sold. You're not going to be sitting around somewhere one day, somebody's going to call you and say, you know what, I like your company, I want to give you a couple $100 million. Or I want to give you $2 billion. Or I really want to give you anything. This just doesn't happen as much as people would like to think that it does. At the end of the day, even when you have something good, even when you have something great, you still have to work hard to take that deal across the finish line. So here's 4 steps. Pick a problem that's universal. Take outside capital that has experience. Recruit some people that have had some experience taking one of these deals across the finish line. And establish a global footprint. This not only de-risks the geographic perception of you just being a local company trying to solve a global problem, but it's also going to help bring people into the business that can really help add a global perspective. So here's a blueprint for developing the ecosystem, for elevating the ecosystem in an emerging market. Of course, identifying problems and starting companies can be a little bit interchangeable. You probably want to find the problem first before you start the company. But if you follow this plan, you can follow it all the way down to the bottom. And having this opportunity at each point of some sort of external validation, some validation that comes from a market that's not yours. Because, when you have a market that's emerging, a market that is new, a market that's nascent, the more that you can get some outside opinion, even if it's just to talk to someone and say, hey, I'd like you to be my CEO, and have them say, well, it's not really interesting for me. But every single one of these opportunities is an opportunity to grow your business, to grow your company, and to create those data points that you need, that all of the emerging markets need in order to elevate the entire ecosystem. So, of course, there are a lot of ways to do this. This is a model that really is created for taking hardcore technology deals or universal solutions to universal problems and creating a series of exits which create incremental data points for the purpose of elevating the ecosystem. And what this does when you do this, it's not aiming too low. What you're going to do is you're going to help an entire ecosystem. You're going to help the next company sell for more. And you know what? You can make another company after that. It'll sell for more money too. So again, a lot of ways to do this. This is just one way, but it is designed to really elevate the ecosystem and create a series of data points. So thank you very much, and that's it.